Good evening. Over the next 18 minutes or so, I'd like to talk to you about a crisis that faces our welfare state and the public services on which we all rely, and about what we might do radically differently in order to preserve it. What are your experiences of the welfare state? Perhaps you send your children to state schools or nurseries. Maybe you visit the GP occasionally or get support with a longer-term health condition. Perhaps you live in social housing, or maybe you've claimed job seekers allowance when you're out of work and looking for something new. All of this, the very fabric of our welfare state, is at risk at the moment. The crisis about which I talk starts with a story that is told by government and repeated by much of the popular press. I'll call it the austerity narrative, and it goes something like this. We spent too much during the years of plenty, and as a result, our national debt is too high. That's in large part due to having a welfare state which is too big and too bureaucratic. Our benefits are too generous, and so even though it might be painful, decisions have to be made to cut spending and curtail benefits. And that is what's happening now across the UK. To give you just some indication of the magnitude of this change, local authority funding in areas that you live in, local councils across the country, is being cut between 2010 and 2015 by over a quarter, about 27% on average during that period. This isn't the scale that efficiencies can take care of. Social housing, refuse collection, youth services, care for the elderly, all of this is going to be cut back. But the austerity imperative tells us that this is necessary for the future, for the economic security, for the future economic security of our country. I believe that this austerity imperative is not only false, but that it's incredibly damaging. And it might lead us down a path where the concept of a safety net dies with the post-war baby boomers, where public services are cut back to such a skeletal state that before long the holes in the safety net will be so big that it won't take much to fall through them. The austerity imperative doesn't offer us another solution. It simply says that we have to roll back the state, and the only alternative it offers is that we might do it ourselves in a big society. But just cutting back on public services and expecting people to step in and fill the place isn't a viable option. It's not going to sustain the welfare state. We need bigger ideas and bolder ideas, because less of the same is just not going to be good enough. And I hope that the ideas that I introduce you to today will offer a new lens on thinking about what we might do differently. To start to tackle the crisis, the first thing I think we need to do is rethink the resources we have at our disposal. Typically, and for many years, we've drawn on rising tax revenues to fund public services delivered by professionals to people. Teachers, doctors, housing support workers, job centre workers, all of their expertise and support is absolutely valuable. But it's not the only resource we could be drawing on. There's a huge pool of experience and expertise that we're missing out on. And that part of the puzzle is something that an American academic called Neva Goodwin has coined the core economy. That term, the core economy, refers to all of the love, time, caring, expertise, activism, and support that sustains us. It's what brings up children, it cares for the elderly, it goes into local campaigns. It is absolutely essential to our functioning and to our well-being. It provides the basic building blocks upon which we live our lives. The market economy, the economic activity that you might think of as paid work, that you might typically think of as economic activity, is totally dependent upon the core economy. But the core economy is unpaid and unvalued work, and so all too often we ignore it. I can use a metaphor here to try and explain it. Think about a computer. If you open up your computer, you have on it a huge range of specialized programs, Microsoft Excel or Internet Explorer. Underlying those programs is a core operating system. Unless that operating system is working, the programs can't run. The market economy is like those specialized programs, while the core economy is like that operating system. It represents a huge pool of resource, of time, expertise, and lived experience that we haven't yet tapped into. So if the core economy represents all of that resource that we're not yet using, the second idea I'd like to introduce you to is one called coproduction, and that's about how we might use those resources differently in order to sustain and preserve the welfare state. It might sound like a mouthful, it certainly is one, But put simply, it's about people who use public services and professionals working in equal partnership to design and deliver services and support across the country. It involves thinking about what people can do as well as what their needs are, building peer support networks so people can access just a little bit of help if they need it, not just the professional solutions. It involves building up people's skills and capabilities through public services, bringing together the resources of the core economy with the resources of the state to preserve and sustain public services. The biggest shift we have to make when we're thinking about putting co-production into practice is shifting our mindset from one which looks at needs, problems, deficits, to one which looks at strengths and assets. And this is because public services at the moment are built around what people need, what support professionals can provide, but not asking what people could also provide for themselves and what they could provide for others. I recently did an interview with a man called Neil who works in Derby that I think illustrates this point quite well. Neil supports people with learning disabilities, many of whom live in residential care homes and have done for many years. And he described to me a conversation he had with a young man who's been living in a care home and who, from morning to night, has professionals doing things to him or for him. Very well-meaning professionals, but they get him up in the morning because he's never been taught how to use an alarm clock. They feed him and they wash him, not because he can't do this for himself, but because he's never been supported to learn or supported to learn how to do it with the support of other people around him. And this isn't just limited to targeted groups of people or people who get a lot of support from public services. It's the case with a huge range of people, from elderly people to young offenders to people who live in supported housing. It's a system of public services which tries to fix the gaps and plug the holes rather than supporting people and developing the core economy. And I think if we take co-production seriously, then what we would be doing is unlocking the resources of the core economy and building a welfare state around what people can do, what support they can offer others, as well as what they can't. And I'd like to tell you just 3 short stories about how we might do that. The first of those comes from a childcare cooperative called Scallywags, just across the river in Tower Hamlets. It's run by 2 childcare workers with the support of parents whose children attend the nursery, typically 3 on any one day. Parents are expected to attend for one day for every 5 days that their child is in the nursery. And as a result of pooling their time and expertise in this way, of bringing together the resources of the childcare workers with the time and expertise of the parents, the cost of childcare goes from a London average of about £5.30 an hour down to £2.50 an hour. A huge saving. But that's not the most important thing. They also get to build friendships with local parents. They get to spend more time with their children. And for many of them, it's the first time they can afford to work. But why aren't there more places like this? They have a huge waiting list, and they're really incredibly popular. Perhaps it's because people are so busy just juggling work and life and childcare that setting up something like that from scratch seems like an insurmountable mountain. But if it was supported and enabled by government, then maybe many more people would take advantage of it. Why is this co-production? Because it involves bringing together the resources of the state with the resources of the core economy, pooling different types of expertise to get better outcomes. The second example comes from elderly care. Think about the kind of homes that your parents, you yourselves, or your children might end up in as you grow older. The home that I'm talking about is called Merivale House in Warwickshire. And it's a home in the sense that it provides support and housing for elderly people with dementia. But it's very different to the type that you might normally find. This is a quote from their website. They say, "There are no barriers within our community. This means we don't wear uniforms, we share toilet facilities, we eat together and we drink from the same cups and eat from the same plates. There are no staff rooms, people are not locked in. People are free to access all living areas and gardens at all times and are free to use the resources of the home," which includes a hot tub, by the way. People are involved in the daily running of their community. This involves shopping, cleaning, washing up, cooking, and doing the laundry. Our community holds regular meetings where the entire community comes together on a weekly basis to discuss matters such as menu changes, redecoration, and holidays. Within our community, everybody has a voice and everybody's opinion is heard. I don't know about you, but I definitely want to grow old in this place. instead of sitting in a home with ITV on in the background and maybe a game of bingo if I'm lucky, being told what I can't do because I have dementia, rather than being supported to pursue my interests and age in an active and fulfilling way. The last example comes from a talk I heard David Halpern, social theorist, give a few years ago, where he described very movingly wanting to offer to help other parents who had children with the rare specialized condition that his son had. There weren't many people around with the skills that he and his wife had developed over the years caring for their son, and he wanted to offer other parents a bit of respite, a weekend or an evening off. But there was no way, no mechanism within the NHS to allow him to do this, no way to bring his skills and experience together with those who might need it. The only support available for those parents was professional support, not the kind of peer support that they could have accessed through his experience and expertise. Why is this co-production? Because it involves bringing together different types of expertise, professional as well as lived experience. And at the moment, our system doesn't do that well enough. And as a result, we're blocking out a huge pool of resource that we could be tapping into. What about those of you who have long-term health conditions? You've probably spent years building up the kind of experience and expertise that could rival a professional's. Is there support that you could offer and get in return? These ideas about pooling our collective time and experience could be at the heart of transforming our welfare state. But they need to be taken out at scale, not just for the targeted groups, the troubled families, or those who are in residential care homes. They need to be applied to universal services, education, healthcare, housing. If we go back to the crisis I described at the start of this talk, we're being told that there's no money left to fund the public services on which we all rely, that support and sustain us. Whatever your politics on austerity are, it seems likely that it's here to stay for at least a few more years. And so I would suggest that we have absolutely no choice but to think differently about the resources that we have that we could use. Our time, our expertise, and our experience are all abundant, and we could be using them in a much more effective way. I think we're at a crossroads at the moment, and in one direction is a future that is fairly bleak, of rising poverty and inequality, of a welfare safety net which is so thin that it can't even allow for people to feed themselves, as the rise in food banks over the recent years is showing us. On the other hand, we could have a state based on principles of solidarity and mutuality, where everybody is able to contribute and give something back. What could we achieve if we had co-production at the heart of our public services? Universal free childcare, a care system for the elderly, supported housing and care for those who need just a little bit of support, youth services that enable young people to flourish, or potentially all of the above, if we could begin to think differently.